The Giving membership is the complete spiritual growth package. For less than $30 per year, you'll get incredible perks from Giving Company's family of brands, including 5 free movie rentals every month from Christian Cinema and discounts on Christian books. Plus, Giving members have the privilege of partnering with World Vision to help end the global water crisis. Become a Giving member today at givingcompany.com/giving membership and start experiencing more fruitful living. The other side of the road is safe, where we sidestep being bothered and avoid getting involved. But rolling up your sleeves and boldly going where few dare to tread, that's walking through Samaria. Each week on our podcast, we introduce you to the special few who walk in the spirit of the Good Samaritan. On behalf of the Giving Company and your hosts, David Hendrickson and Dan Riveros, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. I'm your host, Dan Riveros, with my co-host,
David Hendrickson.
What's up, man? How you doing?
Hey, Dan. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We are in person.
In the studio.
Maskless.
Yep. Season 3, rocking and rolling.
Hard to believe.
We got a friend of the fam here.
A really close friend, familiar face, familiar voice, live. Like not over Zoom, not over Teams, not over WebEx, not over the phone. She is here. Shaunti Feldhahn, welcome.
Welcome.
Hey,
Great to see you.
I am glad to physically be in the studio with you. This is a treat.
Well, Shaunti's a regular in our office with all the collaboration that we do with her team on content and publishing and just great ideas. And so it is really, really good to see you. I think the last time I saw you was before Christmas.
Probably.
Right?
It's been months and months. Yeah. Like all of us, we're all very excited. We're like little kids being in person. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, if you don't mind, Shaunti, I know our audience knows you, our listeners know you, and with your prominence in speaking and writing and being a part of Giving Company, but I'm going to read a short bio just to refresh their memory, and then we're going to dive into all sorts of things because you have been busy. You've had a lot going on. So here we go.
Yep.
Shaunti received her graduate degree from none other than Harvard University and was an analyst on Wall Street before unexpectedly becoming a social researcher and best-selling author. Today, she applies her analytical skills to investigate eye-opening, life-changing truths about relationships, both at home and in the workplace. Her groundbreaking books, such as For Women Only, Thriving in Love and Money, and her fine series of devotionals have sold more than 3 million copies in 25 languages. Her research is regularly featured in media as diverse as The Today Show, Focus on the Family, and The New York Times. I don't think you see Focus on the Family and The New York Times like in the same sentence very often. Anyway, Shaunti and her family live in Atlanta and enjoy every moment of life at warp speed, which I can definitely say that is true. So, Shaunti, it is, again, great to have you here.
It's always good to be with you guys.
Well, I have a mask to the left of me. Dan, you have a mask to the right of you. The Ronavirus hit the Feldhahn family. I think you and Jeff, right, were the ones who got it. So
yes,
how is the family?
In the room
how's the family doing?
How's the family doing? Did you guys have it at the same time? Who got who sick?
We did.
Okay.
We actually were one of those people that got hit really hard. Actually, I ended up in the ER twice.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, you didn't know that, huh? Interesting.
I did not know you were in the ER.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, they were worried I had blood clots in my lungs, in my lungs at one point. Thankfully, I didn't, but that's a big coronavirus thing.
Yeah.
Once it gets serious, so you don't mess with that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so anyway, we got the full we got lots of antibodies.
You lost the taste. You lost the taste and smell and everything?
Actually, I didn't.
Okay.
I discovered that there's something in addition to losing taste and smell, which is that everything tastes horrible.
Oh, yeah. That's what happened to Rhonda.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Like metallic?
It didn't lose the taste.
Right.
Everything tasted metallic.
Yeah, I had that.
Oh, did you
Hers
really?
was smoky.
I lost the taste, and then when I had coffee, I could sense something, but it was just like metal,
Oh.
So I read something because I'm a researcher and I can't help it.
Yeah.
when I was looking at all of this, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, there was this fascinating piece, I think it was in the Atlantic, on the fact that the smell scientists, I forget their name, there's like some word for a smell scientist, but they had actually identified really early on that the loss of taste and smell properly predicted whether somebody had the coronavirus without a test back when, there were no tests.
You're kidding.
Something like 85, 89% of the time.
Wow.
And so like all the temperatures, taking the temperature only predicted it like 30 or 40% of the time. So we should have had a smell test or a taste test instead of thermometers.
When we start coming back to the office in June, we should put like
there you go.
Candies out and certain different things that smell and taste different and see how people do.
The worst part about it is just because you don't taste doesn't mean you don't crave. So you I still had like particular cravings,
but not the enjoyment.
Really?
Yeah, and I would try to be like, this is counterproductive. It's it's nothing.
I'm sure everybody listening to this is nodding their heads.
So Rhonda got it. This is terrible. We were on our way to Caroline's graduation. This, right?
I remember this, yes.
And all of a sudden she gets this bad headache.
Yeah.
And we go to the ceremony. It's not the regular graduation ceremony, so it's outdoors in the stadium. Everybody's distanced. Everybody has to wear masks. You take your picture with your graduate, our daughter, in certain places, like super safe. But you can just see Rhonda start spinning. And by the time dinner was over, she's on fire. And so that was a Friday night.
Yeah.
Saturday, she gets tested. She's, of course, positive. Sunday, I roll in, and the urgent care physician, he's an ER doc at Northside, I think, or whatever. And he's like, he points his finger at me and he goes, "You are going to get it. Just be ready." And I never got it.
That's awesome.
Isn't that crazy?
That's amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Same car, same hotel room, all that. Rhonda had it and I didn't.
Crazy.
I'll just be like a little extra Lord's favor on your side.
Not everybody gets it, right?
Yeah.
And I guess we'll be studying this for years, 4 years. Wow. Well, everybody doing good? Kids doing good?
Yep.
Good.
They are going through the process of, my daughter's in college and she's all about civic duty. So she's gotten her vaccinations and going through some of the side effects of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They say the second one's like the one that hits, right?
If you haven't had it, Jeff got his vaccination and got hammered for a day because if you've had it, the first one acts like the second one, where sometimes,
okay, gotcha.
Because that's what it's doing. It's like your immune system is gearing up to try to fight it, but your immune system is already geared up. So if anybody wanted to know the science,
I took my mom yesterday.
There we go.
It was a pretty simple process to do
cool.
it.
Yeah.
My second shot is a week from tomorrow. So we'll see how
All
it
right.
goes. We'll see
You'll
how
have
it
to let
goes.
us know.
So besides catching it, how has COVID affected the business and things?
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people are in the same place that we are. It was pretty dramatic. We lost 40% of our revenue last year.
How often would you speak? Like in
40
a normal
to 50 times a year.
Wow. See, that's a ton.
And there's a lot of people who aren't sort of part of this world of writing and, doing books and blogging and podcasting and traveling and speaking, don't realize that it all works together. So if one thing falls off, everything, like the wheels fall off the car in some ways. And so about 2/3 of our revenue is tied to events, even though we don't make 2/3 of our revenue just from like honorarium at events.
Got it.
Selling books in the back of the room.
Yep,
People
exactly.
then going, oh, I need to go get that. And they'll go get it off of Amazon or whatever, right? So it's all tied in together. And
that was dead, right? For a while?
Well, everybody who is an author speaker, our last event for all of us, like 100% of us, was March 7th.
Yeah.
That Saturday I did this big, marriage conference in South Carolina, drove home. And then by Wednesday, everything on my calendar for 2020 was
just evaporated.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Were you able to pick up any of those things virtually? I mean, I know it's not the same, but did you do virtual events?
It's interesting. A lot of people like us have found surprisingly that ended up being more robust than we thought it would be. I was thinking it would be like just a couple kind of pity events.
Yeah.
I know we were supposed to have you here in person, but no, actually it ended up being a whole nother type of event.
Yeah.
And it lent itself to, like, for example, last fall when all the college students they were trying to come back because, like my daughter, her college, they were allowed to come back in person, but they weren't allowed into each other's dorms. and they weren't allowed to be with each other. And so they're all isolated in their little silos. Yeah. And so there was all this mental health stuff. And so I got asked to do a virtual seminar on mental health impacts of kindness because we had done this big research project. And so that's an example of something that never would have happened in a normal year. But there was a lot of learning and a lot of blessings from that, actually.
Yeah, it feels like COVID really brought mental health to like the frontline discussion.
100%.
Which is, that's an upside for sure.
It's a huge upside, especially because I personally think the church has a huge role to play in that. And so embracing that and going, okay, how can we step into this thing that God has handed us that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of without a specialty in it before? I think every church has a role to play there. Every ministry.
Yeah. So is it opening back up? Are speaking events more prevalent now than they used to be?
We're sitting here in the middle of April, and we're seeing signs that they are thinking about probably opening up. As of February, any calls that we made to churches, it was like, probably at some point, maybe we'll think about it. Now it's actually like if you call somebody or they call you, people are a little more willing to say, we might actually have physically people come for this fall.
That's good.
So,
It's been 13 months. You're right. I mean, I remember crazy. We did the I Still Believe movie premiere on Thursday, March 12th.
Yep, I remember that.
And Friday, March 13th, we still had Mark and Jeanette Henning here to do some video editing and some interviews and that kind of thing. But the world was scattering on that Friday.
Because Tom Hanks, the NBA,
Tom Hanks was a big
all of that had happened the day before.
That's right.
Not Forrest Gump.
And so everybody went home Friday afternoon. We put Mark and Jeanette on a plane. My kids came back from spring break that Saturday, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. We tried to come back last summer, for 9 days. We did 3 weeks of 3 days, and we were like, this is not good. And a lot of it was the challenge the parents were having with daycare and childcare, and then were the schools going back or not? And this is last fall, and of course they didn't. So we just said, forget it. And
just so many unknowns.
Yeah.
It's like there's, so many unknowns.
It's interesting from a ministry perspective, and I'm sure there's probably people listening to this who run small businesses or run their own companies or whatever who, all of us lived through this pivot, the year of the pivot. Like, what is it going to look like? And it was interesting that all the virtual stuff that we're doing now is directly tied to the realization then that, like Jeff, my husband, as soon as everything started canceling, he's like, okay, we've been talking about doing online video courses, for example. Streaming courses. We've been talking about doing this for 2 years, 3 years. We're always too busy. We're on the road. Well, guess what? We're all stuck at home on top of each other. So the four of us, me and Jeff and our 2 teenagers, we are going to build a video studio in our basement. Yeah. So it took us a couple of months. We're doing this on our own without any help. We don't know what we're doing, but Jeff's watching YouTube videos and figuring it out. And we built a video studio in our basement.
There you go.
It's awesome,
Well, speaking of you and Jeff, you published a book together, which we referenced in your bio.
Yes, you did.
Thriving in Love and Money, 5 game-changing insights about your relationship, your money, and yourself. This sounds like a really super important topic for married couples. The issue of money is often one of the biggies as far as creating challenges in marriage. Give our listeners a little bit of insight about the book, what it's about, what they would garner from it.
Yeah, this is based on our most recent big research study. For those who didn't quite grasp that, that's kind of what we do. As a lot of what we do is social research on whatever the topic is that we think we can dig out something little that is going to have a big impact if you apply it in your relationship or in your life. And money in marriage is one of those issues, right? So we didn't want to, nor were we qualified to take over for Dave Ramsey or somebody who does here's how you budget. You do not want to know how I would budget.
Oh gosh, us either. Rhonda and I, no way.
You really don't want my advice on that.
It's not our spiritual gift.
Yes, exactly. However, what we did realize from all these years of doing marriage ministry is that money, what we eventually discovered with the research is it's not about the money. It's like when you're having issues, when you're having tension, when you can't get on the same page, when you're a husband or a wife who thinks, why is my spouse comfortable doing, spending this money or saving here or whatever, it's none of that is about the money, it turns out. And so that's basically what the book is about. Well, what is it about? If it's not, about the technical piece of it that causes the relationship issues, what is it? And so that's what we studied, and that's what we dug out, and that's basically what made the book. You will not find how to do a budget or spreadsheets or whatever.
awesome.
There's literally nothing about that because it is entirely about all the kind of the emotional and relational factors that are running under the surface that you don't know is there.
Wow.
I'll give you a silly example, but it always would bug me to death when I'd had a long day of meetings or whatever, and I'm driving home and I call Jeff. I'm like, you know what? We've been, going in all these different directions. How about I just pick some Chinese food on the way home for the family? And I hear, well, we have some chicken in the fridge from Costco. And that'll be a lot cheaper. And why don't I just grill that? Like, why does that bug me? Why does it bug him that I call and ask that question? And so it has nothing to do, it turns out, with the actual dollars and cents.
So he's offering to cook it?
Good.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
He's
totally.
offering, he's
Jeff
not even
is the
putting on
cook
any
in
to
our
cook.
family.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
it's not like you do
totally
it.
choose the Chinese.
Yeah,
I'd be
thank you. But I didn't realize until we did the research. Perfect example. I didn't realize that literally that's an example of one of our findings is that we're valuing different things and we just don't realize what's the value.
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize that subconsciously I'm thinking, we haven't had any family time. And we've been in all these different directions. Morgan has volleyball and Luke has track and we're, and if we grill the chicken, that's going to be we have the prep time and then the grilling and then the cleanup and then we have to start homework. And so I'm basically I'm buying an hour of family time. That's
and
awesome.
The leftovers.
Yes,
and the leftovers, right?
And I'm like, $35 or $40 to buy this precious hour of family time. I'm like, absolutely. And Jeff is thinking, and a lot of other people who are the more saver types have told me that they're thinking, if we keep doing this, we're going to be homeless in retirement.
Yeah.
So it's just two different values. It's just an example, silly example.
That's good.
So that wasn't the moment that sparked the idea for the book, was it?
Those were many moments like that.
So is that how you get the ideas? There's many moments
of how to do a research study or what research study
what
to do?
sparks it? You know what I mean? What's the spark?
I don't know if anyone's asked me that question before, Dan. I don't know the answer to that. One of the things I will say is anyone who has done marriage ministry has seen that, stuff like money and sex gets blamed as these are the top causes of divorce and these are the top, you hear that.
Isn't in-laws in there
in-laws
as well?
is probably in there. And
With all due respect to my in-laws. It's just something that popped in my head.
Yes, family relationships is
Family
one of them.
stuff,
Yes,
that's
exactly.
right.
Parenting, whatever. But in all seriousness, you hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And I started to think at some point along the way, it's not quite that simple.
Not that cut and dry.
Yeah. And then sort of realizing this is something that we were supposed to do. It's sort of a long story, but it was God was handing it to us and saying, thou shalt do this.
Shaunti, one of the things that we appreciate about you is this healthy marriage, I guess that's the only term that I can think of right now, of science and biblical truth. And, sometimes believers get accused, sometimes rightfully so, of ignoring science or blowing off science or what have you. Yeah. Your world is very different from that.
Yeah.
We know probably more about the kindness challenge and that research than we do thriving in love and money. But can you give our listeners a sense as to how much research goes into one of these books, one of these projects?
A lot. So the easiest way of explaining it is that each project usually, now there are some sort of exceptions to this, but we're doing these on all of them, we're doing these big nationally representative surveys. Those are expensive. We're doing interviews. We're doing focus groups in order to try to dig out what is it, the nub of what is causing people issues, that if we just change something little, if we just make some tweaks here or are aware of stuff there, like the concept that, hey, by the way, it's not about the money. Like that's like a super simple thing. And it makes you go, oh, well, why are we fighting then? Like, so it sort of stops you. And then we give you some things. Here's the factors we found. Those are all simple, but it takes a ton of time and money to dig out those simple things that matter. So we've spent, we've probably we've done this for about 17, 18 years now, started with For Women Only, the study of men, where we women had to understand you guys.
Only the study of men.
Well, the subtitle is What You Need to Know About the Inner Lives of Men. But with that one, from the last 17 years, I guess that's been 18 years, we've surveyed more than 35,000 men and women, and we've spent more than $750,000 on the research. Because each of these studies is anywhere from 25,000 to 100,000 or more, depending on how complicated it is. But you get really good data. Like if you're trying to do it in a really rigorous way. Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect, but we're always under the guidance of Chuck Cowan, who used to be chief of survey design at the Census Bureau. And he's been amazing from the very first project. He's kind of guided us and like, he won't let me get away with anything. I'm like, please let me ask the question this way. He's like, no. And so we try to do our best so that you can rely on the data.
How often does the data shock you?
Always. Yes. Sort of by definition, because what we're trying to dig out is the stuff that you didn't know before. You know, those little things that are going to make a big difference. So by definition, at the beginning, I'm going, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, really?
Yeah.
So that's 100% of the time.
Cool.
And then, by the way, something you guys, I don't even know if you know this, David. I think I might have told you, but one of the things that's a hallmark of being a researcher like this is that there are some things that I'm convinced are going to come out on the survey. Like I've heard it 125 times in the focus groups, and I'm sure that it's going to come out on the nationally representative survey, and it doesn't. Wow. And I'm like, dang, I really wanted to put that in the book. But you kind of have to. You have to some degree, you have to be, pretty good about having judgment of, okay, did I ask the question weird? Like, were people misunderstanding it? You have to test it. But yeah, if it doesn't come out, it doesn't come out. You got to set that one aside. Tough. So.
Wow. Well, we have been the beneficiaries here at Giving Company through our iDisciple publishing label of all of the content that you and your ministry has developed over probably that same time period. And you have written with us, which has just been such a gift for us, the Find series, a series of women's devotionals, journals, a Bible study called Find Balance. Find Rest has been immensely popular. You seem to know what's kind of ticking in the heart and the mind of a woman from a faith and family and relational and marriage perspective. Your latest book with us, a devotional, is called Find Joy, a devotional journey to unshakable wonder in an uncertain world. We released a journal with it as well. I want to read that again. A devotional journey to unshakable wonder in an uncertain world. If there's one thing we have experienced in the last 13 months at least, it is uncertainty. Yeah. So tell our listeners how great this product is and what they're going to experience going through the Find Joy devotional.
Well, one of the things that we knew we needed to tackle before we knew that there would be a pandemic was the kind of the epidemic of stress. That all of us sort of have experienced this. We all have way more of that sense of stress and worry and anxiety than we want. And I was really, really inclined personally to tackle that of what are the things that science and scripture says about that. And one of the things that all of the science shows is that stress is often either caused by or dramatically exacerbated by uncertainty. And so that's what I was doing, really, was like, okay, what does the research say? What does science say? What does scripture say? What do our studies say about this, to the degree that there's been certain studies that have dealt with that? And so that was what we were tackling, because that's not what God has for us, right? Like he's talking so often about wanting abundant life for us. And yes, we're going to have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. Like, yeah, living in a fallen world is going to come with some stress. But the whole point is that he wants us to navigate that so we don't have that life of stress, and that we have that sense of joy no matter what. And we didn't know when we wrote the book in 2019.
Little did we know.
we didn't know how crucial that was going to be, that it would be released in the middle of a pandemic. We had no idea just how much people would need to find joy.
Exactly.
And so that was another example to me of God just setting it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to give us a way forward, not just a here's how you, hey, by the way, you're not supposed to be stressed. Like, well, help. What does that mean? And so that's the hallmark. I think that's why I've loved working with you guys on those iDisciple devotionals, because I've really appreciated your desire to say it's not just about reading something and going, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, how do I apply that every day to my life, which a daily devotional is good at.
Yeah. It's good.
Cool.
It's good.
Yeah. So Let's Find Joy, kids version.
Yes,
How about
I'm
that?
so excited about this.
cool, yeah.
I know. When Katie mentioned this to me, so for those who aren't aware, Katie Kenny Phillips has been a longtime friend of mine.
Friend of the show.
And friend of the show, yes.
She has a son going to Georgia. Just want to
just stop.
go to
Just stop.
Dogs on top.
Okay.
Shaunti's daughter Morgan goes to tech, and we love Morgan, and we're good with that. But I just wanted
her
to plug.
son and my son have been really close friends since they were in 5th grade.
You can come. You can come to a game,
thanks.
Shaunti, if you want to.
Thanks, David.
Sorry, go ahead.
I can't tell.
Katie Kenny Phillips.
I still haven't broken to Morgan that Sam is going to Georgia. I haven't broken it to her yet. Anyway, because our kids all grew up together.
Yeah.
So anyway, the thing that a lot of people don't know is that we've been friends for years and years. She's an amazing writer. And I started needing a lot of help. And so she eventually became not just a close friend, but my senior editor.
Wow.
And then when you guys started trying to get into, okay, is this a feasible thing to do children's books? There's such a need here. There's a space that has sort of a heart cry for some of these messages for children. Mm-hmm. And she was, to me, the perfect person to step into that. And so I'm really grateful that has happened. And then I was really surprised and grateful when she came to me and said, how about sort of a Find Joy for kids? I'm like, mind blown. I wouldn't have thought of it, but
well,
I'm super
and to
excited.
our listeners, and these are our products, so I'm not trying to be pushy here, but for the moms, Find Joy and then Let's Find Joy for their kids. This really is a critical time to get your hands on resources like this because of how wacky
the world is.
Things are right now. So
the thing to me that, see, I don't have the time, just like you don't have the time, to just do something. Right. Like
That's right.
We get proposed lots of good ideas every week. There are things that come. You've probably even mentioned a few things, and I'm like, I can't.
Maybe
so
someday.
Sorry, I love you guys, but and the to me, what was so crucial about that is that when we talk about uncertainty leading to stress, that's not just for adults. That's not just grown-ups. Yeah. Kids have had to navigate this weird uncertainty in ways that kids probably haven't had to in terms of society-wide for generations, probably the last time when so many kids had this level of uncertainty, which is no way comparable, but it was probably like World War II era, like in Great Britain, where they're leaving their families and going out into the countryside to get them out of London, or whatever.
Yeah.
And the kids are having, like, there's this whole nother world. And all these kids, they're now, it's not just the stress of not being in school, although that's a big piece of it. Now think about it. You've got these little ones who this is now mentally, like 4 or 5-year-old, this is all that they can remember. Like they can't remember going to preschool before. And now mom and dad are having to go back to work.
Yeah.
And they're having to go to preschool or whatever. And it's stressful. Like they don't remember before this. And how do you navigate this new world for them? And I love the concept of equipping kids to do this in this using the same findings from science and scripture. And so we took these 8 things that we had found, these 8 elements that are crucial to finding joy, and we put them in kid language for this little children's book. And I'm really, really excited about it because
cool.
I really honestly think like the illustrator did an amazing job of translating a lot of it into imagery.
Yeah. The book is amazing. So we'll let our listeners know at a future date when that product is available, because we are obviously very excited about it. So, Shaunti, you are more of a biblical scholar than I am, I would say.
Oh gosh, don't put that on me. No.
And Dan and I designed this podcast around the parable of the Good Samaritan from Luke chapter 10. And very often I will infer things out of the parables of Jesus that may or may not be theologically sound. But hear me out on this. I think, when you dissect the parable of the Good Samaritan, there are a few things that were intended for people to take away from it. The fact that the hero of the story was a Samaritan, and that at the time, the Jews and Samaritans were probably like Democrats and Republicans today in our country, or like the Catholics and the Protestants in Northern Ireland, or whatever it might be. And so there's this idea that you can be socially, culturally, religiously, whatever, at odds with someone and be a good Samaritan, walk across the road for somebody who's been ignored, left behind, etc. One of the things that I pull out of the Good Samaritan is kind of resilience, overcoming adversity, because part of me thinks like maybe that Samaritan took some hits by walking across the road and showing kindness, was criticized for taking care of the Jewish person. We don't know if the Samaritan was rich or poor, but he winds up kind of over providing financially when he's taking care of the Jewish person in the inn and providing. Yeah. So that's my non-theologian kind of extraction from the parable, which is adversity and resilience are woven throughout that parable. That parable. So thanks for backing me up there, because I feel like you're better at this than I am. Anyway, my point being, Shaunti Feldhahn, Harvard grad, successful researcher, author, been on Wall Street, beautiful family, Morgan's at Tech, like Jeff, successful attorney. You've had some adversity. Yeah. You called me one afternoon and said, David, I've got some news. Yeah. I got a cancer diagnosis. Yeah. Tell our listeners what that's been like.
That was a shocker. We have no history in our family of breast cancer. And so I did what you're supposed to do as a woman my age, which I'll pretend is 45, but
that's what we're going with.
I'll age myself down a couple of years. But I, did the mammogram thing and was called back for a biopsy.
Regular screening? Was it a regular screening?
Kind of, yeah. It was a little more complicated than that, but yeah.
And is this before or after COVID?
This is in the middle of.
This is while you have COVID?
I had literally just recovered from COVID. Like I was just getting my feet back under me. And I think like I was in the hospital, in the ER with one of them on a Sunday. And I think the mammogram was on Monday and I almost canceled it. Thank God I didn't cancel it. Right. But but it ended up being, very surprisingly, it ended up actually being breast cancer. And so that was one of those moments where you're like, I'm saying to myself, I have breast cancer, like over and over again for days. Like that seems very unreal to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you are doing good.
And now,
right?
now we are middle of April, so we are 4 months from that time, 3.5 months.
Okay.
And I've gone through the whole gamut of the having to make decisions, which, by the way, for your listeners, you probably have a lot of male listeners, I'm guessing, and whose wives,
Do we
you
know
know,
our gender breakdown? I wonder.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually pretty in the
pretty
middle.
even?
Yeah, it's pretty
Okay.
even. Yeah.
So any men who are listening to this who, at some, you're kind of like, how would I ever walk a wife through that? Or a woman who, like me, knew nothing about this arena, like nothing. I literally knew one person at the beginning of this who I knew was a friend who had breast cancer. You don't realize walking through this process is a lot of the doctors looking at you and going, so what do you want to do?
Right.
I'm like, what do you mean? What do I want to do?
Yeah.
You're
What should
supposed
I
to
do?
Tell me what to do.
Should I do?
Exactly. Wow.
And the reason, thankfully, for that is that it was caught early. It was stage 1. It was, there were a lot of options that you have, as opposed to when it's further along, it's like, no, you don't have any options. This is what you will do if you want to recover. So
it was
went through
best
that.
case scenario for a bad scenario.
It was. And that's what the doctor said.
well
like,
said.
for giving
Yeah.
you bad news,
Yeah,
this is
that's
like
good.
the best bad news that I could give you. Thank God. I know a lot of people listening to this, that isn't what they've heard, right? They've heard this is a challenge. There's going to be some issues here. I am very aware that there's people who've lost loved ones. So I'm very grateful that from my perspective, it has been sort of the lightest version of this.
Okay.
So did the lumpectomy, just finished radiation, and had no idea how much time all that was going to take. But so I'm now still in the prescribed rest period. I'm slightly breaking my doctor's orders
I was
by
going to
being
say,
here
is
with
this
you.
rest? Are we resting here?
But this is fun for me. This is not like having a deadline of some deliverable hanging over my head. So this is enjoyable. But I was ordered by my doctor to stop the Shaunti
Madness.
for a month.
Well, we are so thankful for where you are at.
Me
today.
too.
And
I am too.
Even though it was caught early, even though it was diagnosed as stage 1, it's got to be scary, and it is radiation, and it takes a toll on your health.
It
And
does.
It's the real thing.
I will tell you, I did not know when I first started this process, knowing nothing about it, when they said, and you'll need to go to radiation. Okay. And so at the beginning, it didn't end up being this long. By the beginning, they were like, so it's probably going to be every day for 6 or 7 weeks. Wow. And I'm like,
hello?
Say that again. Are you saying every day? They're like, no. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Every day, Monday through Friday. That's better. So it ended up being, because it was stage 1, it ended up being every day for 4 weeks. So, but still that's really disruptive.
Yeah.
So,
Wow, gosh. Well, we're thankful.
I'm thankful
for where
too.
you're at.
Yes, me too.
So as the world turns, you've got a COVID diagnosis, you have a cancer diagnosis.
Yep.
And that is not the only adversity that you get thrown your way.
I knew you were going to bring this up.
So,
Dan.
I'm sorry. Like, you can tell Dan to edit this out later if you don't want
it's
it.
fine.
But again, I'm going to go to the Good Samaritan. Like, one of the things that I feel like we have gotten bad at is like in the digital world, like Christians attacking Christians, like people just attacking people. Like, it seems so easy because it's digital, right? You can yell at somebody you don't know on Twitter or what have you. Anyway.
And you sort of feel like you can get away with it.
And you feel like you can get away with it. Well, you have one of these scenarios where in the digital realm, I think, although you did some healthy reconciliation kind of Christian activity, but you were you were put on the defensive kind of inappropriately in the internet realm or in the relational realm or the Christian realm. And man, talk about bad timing, but just tough adversity again.
Yeah, all at the same time. So I was in the middle of trying to figure out how to handle the cancer diagnosis. It was very early on.
Is this aware to the public at the time?
I'm sorry?
Is this aware to the public at the time?
Probably, we had probably just announced it. That's my guess, is that it was somewhere in that same time frame that we had just said, hey, here's this thing I'm walking through. I'll keep you guys updated to my followers and whatever.
Yeah.
Which is really, and people were really, really sweet. So we became aware, and I'll be very careful how I speak about this because she is my friend and has been for many years, that there is a woman, and I'm not going to name her just because I don't think that's honoring to anybody, but that there's a woman who's an old friend in the marriage author speaker space who... Small
circle, I would imagine, right? That space?
Yeah. There's not that many of us, a few dozen people who are sort of full-time in the author, speaker, marriage space specifically. And this particular old friend in that space who had always been like an amazing co-laborer for the kingdom, and, we wrote guest blogs for each other, and she had started a Pinterest board of sort of marriage people where we all kind of contributed marriage blogs. And people have been in this position where they've been in ministry or business together, and then something weird happens. And in this case, the something weird was that she had become concerned, and very understandably so, by the way, I need to caveat this. She had become understandably concerned that in the kind of evangelical community around marriage, that the way that pastors, authors, marriage speakers would talk about like sexual issues, marriage issues around that topic, that there was some things that were probably being thrown, and this is just an example, but kind of thrown out there that they didn't realize could actually be damaging. And I'll give you sort of a classic example, and we've seen this in our research as well, which is that in any marriage conference, it's a temptation to make jokes about the fact that, the husband is always the one who wants more sex, and, he's chasing his wife around the bed, and, hey, wives, you got to, and this is obviously from our research, hey, wives, by the way, this is not just a physical need for him. You think of it as a physical need. It's actually this emotional need to feel desired by his wife, and, this gives him a sense of confidence, a sense of well-being in the other areas of his life. And so there's sort of a tendency in the marriage sort of conference world to have that be, that's it. That's just the way it works in Christian marriage.
Gotcha.
And in marriage in general. And statistically, our surveys have found 18%, others have found in the early 20s, so it's probably around 20% of marriages where it's the reverse. Yeah. Where it's the wife.
I've actually seen some of this data from you. You guys tweet it out from time to time or put it on Patheos or whatever.
We write blogs about that and whatever. Even though we, in the books, we're having to cover the majority of cases. We always say, but there's another side of the story. So go to the blogs and get more details if that's you, if you're in that minority. But to sort of reassure people, that's a pretty large minority. Like, that's 1 out of 5. That's not like 2%, right? That's a pretty sizable number. Yep. And the problem is, and this is just one example, when you present it in a conference or in a book or in a sermon as like this other way is the way, you have 20% of the women sitting there thinking, I am bizarre and broken and a pervert, and the husband is sitting there thinking, I'm less than a man. There's something wrong with me. And if we don't deal with that,
collateral damage there.
There's some collateral damage, and you don't kind of recognize that there's some people for whom that causes like significant emotional angst, and they don't feel like they get any help. And what does that mean? What does that look like? So this old friend had started to hear from these women over the years. Yeah. And understandably had very much kind of internalized that concern, and including then going the next step into people who were actively hurt by, in my view, understanding certain evangelical messages around marriage and sex. In my view, most of that is from misunderstanding. Classic example in my case, one of the chapters in For Women Only about men is about helping wives understand what does it mean when you say men are visual? Like, you hear that, what does that actually mean? And helping women understand how sexualized the culture is and how it's constantly confronting our men. And men, especially Christian men, are constantly trying to take those thoughts captive and bounce their eyes and, trying to honor their wives. But it's a constant temptation, and men just have had to learn how to deal with it, basically. And you can either make healthy choices or unhealthy choices, and it's not the temptation that matters. It's the action that matters. Yeah. Say, both of the men in the room say yes at the same time.
No, that's good.
But
the temptation's real. Like, you can't pretend.
You can't pretend it's not. Yeah. And I think it's only 3% of men on the survey said it wasn't. Jeff jokingly, and I would get in trouble for this. Jeff jokingly would that's the liar, liar, pants on fire cohort.
Exactly.
But no, I mean, I believe it. I think that there are some men for whom that's just not a temptation for whatever reason, but it's a small-ish statistic. But when that is misunderstood by maybe a woman who's been hurt because her husband has an addiction or whatever, we would get anguished emails from those women over the years saying, "You're saying it's okay for my husband to look," or I'm never going to be able to trust my husband again now that I know that he has this temptation. And that is not healthy.
Not what you're doing.
Of course not, right? Yeah. But it's a misunderstanding.
Yep.
And it's not a healthy response. And so we always say, hey, you know what? First of all, so sorry you're hurting. So sorry you've had this trouble in your relationship. You know how we talk about, there's a difference between temptation and sin. If he's making the choices that, honor you, that's something to be aware of and to thank him for, rather than saying, I'm never going to be able to trust you again just because I know you have the temptation. And so that's an example of, hey, you're misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. And, oh, by the way, the take every thought captive out of reverence for Christ, that's not just men taking their thoughts captive. That's us taking those emotional kind of reactions captive as well.
Yep.
But the problem is that when you hear from a flood of those women at the same time, my old friend, I think, started to feel like me and others in the marriage space, because this is not just me, this is sort of a concerted campaign against a lot of evangelical marriage teachers, that she started to feel like we didn't care about those women. And that we were saying things knowing that it was hurting people. Yeah. And that this teaching is doing damage, and that as a result, we needed to be publicly called to account. And so the decision that I think was started years ago, when I didn't know this, a couple years ago, but the decision started to be, okay, let's see if we can quantify the damage that's been done to these women.
Okay.
And let's write a book about it. Yeah. And let's call it out publicly and kind of basically attack any Christian marriage author that is viewed as advancing these damaging messages, even though I would think that a healthier example, a way of doing it, would be, let's talk about these things, which are real issues.
Let's expand the dialogue.
Let's expand the dialogue.
There's more to the story. Correct. As opposed to...
Well, it's more to the story, and to me, it's a much more healthy response. When you're talking about somebody who's already hurting, it's far more healthy for that person to say, let's help you correct this misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And if you're hearing something that's damaging and hurtful, even if somebody has said it in a way that isn't a misunderstanding, because there are, I mean, we all make mistakes. Let's have grace for that, and let's figure out how I can have a healthy marriage, and just sort of say, I can forgive that person for saying it that way, rather than, that's a more healthy approach. Let's correct the misunderstandings. Let's call people in the Christian community to be more careful about our language. Let's recognize that there's this 20% that's hearing something that could be hurtful, figure out how to deal with it. And, as we correct the misunderstandings in the individual people, let's extend forgiveness and grace, as opposed to what I feel has happened, which is stirring up all of those hurting women to be more hurt and more outraged and more angry, really.
Yeah.
And I don't see that as being a healthy, kingdom-oriented approach. And it's very hurtful from my perspective to be constantly attacked. Because that outrage machine, I hate to put it that way, but that's what a lot of people see, not just in this situation, but a lot of political and whatever, is it becomes outrage marketing.
Yes.
And you get more attention and more followers by being outraged.
Were there other of your peers that got similar attacks?
Many.
Or was this, oh, really?
Many.
Wow.
There were about 4 of us that were the primary targets.
Okay.
We're pretty much shredded in her book. Shredded in her podcasts, yes. Shredded in her podcasts, and sort of very viciously attacked by like Facebook outrage, like the followers get stirred up and then they start going and trolling the person on their own because they've been stirred up over here by the podcast or the Facebook. So there's about 4 of us that she thinks are very dangerous. But it's expanded, the circle expands. And that's the problem with outrage marketing, right? Is that you have to have more outrage.
Yeah, you got to follow up.
That's a good point.
And candidly, just taking it outside of that example and looking at what's going on in our culture, I think that's what feeds a lot of what we see as the unhealthy kind of tone and dialogue on Twitter or in social media or on the news commentators, is that if your thing is outrage, it's kind of like a drug where you have to get more and more and more outraged to feel the same hit.
Yeah.
And so it tends to go looking for the next victim.
Yeah,
it tends to go looking for the next, like, what's the next thing to be outraged about?
Yeah.
And that's just pretty much as far as you can get from the model that Jesus had.
Correct.
Because you're talking with Jesus, when you talk about the Good Samaritan, that is a perfect example of that Samaritan. Now, obviously, it's a parable, right? It wasn't a real life example of something that happened that Jesus watched and then told the story. It's a parable, but still, in the parable, that could have just as easily been an example of the Samaritan going, you Jews, you have been like so unjust, which was true, right?
Yep.
You have treated us like second-class citizens. Let's see how it feels, buddy.
Yep.
I might even leave you a note while you're bleeding by the roadside,
while I walk
saying,
by.
"Well, how does it feel, dude?"
Yeah.
And you would have felt justified.
Yeah.
And that's the human, broken, sinful part of us. And yet, Jesus in the parable is obviously saying, you have got to fight that part of yourself. He doesn't go into that, but his listeners would have immediately understood that.
Yeah.
So.
Is there's not a happy ending here?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
No, we're all still pretty much in the middle of it.
I mean, hey, the weapon forms, but it doesn't prosper. That's all it is. That's the weapon forming, and it's not going to prosper.
Yeah. I will receive that from you, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's interesting. There was a particularly vicious attack that I won't repeat. That was essentially accusing me of advancing pedophilia, and a whole bunch of other stuff that was very personal against my family, not just me, which is like, okay, you've gone over the boundary.
Yeah. That's how we all react.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what was interesting was that up until that point, we meaning marriage ministry people, we'd all kind of been attacked in our own little silos. And I was just flooded because so many people saw that and were like, okay, that's over the bounds. That's over the line.
Yeah.
And so I got so many text messages and so many emails from people with encouragement and praying for me and praying for her and praying for her followers. And the hard part about this, and I'm not going to let myself cry, she's my friend, right? Like I'm worried about her.
Yeah.
And I know her heart, and I keep telling her some of what you're talking about. I don't agree with all of it, obviously, but some of what you're talking about is so needed, but nobody's going to be able to hear it in a healthy way in this with this methodology. But the thing that was amazing, that was a huge blessing, was having kind of this coalescing with so many marriage ministry people who are trying, maybe not perfectly, and there's a couple of people who haven't handled it very well themselves, which is like, when you attack back, it's like,
that doesn't help.
That's not, you can't heal hurt with, further hurt. Like it doesn't work that way. But hearing and talking to so many people in the Christian marriage space who are all like, this is hard, this is hurtful, but this is a way for us to sort of support each other and to do what was needed if there had been a better way of handling it, which is coming together and trying to figure out, okay, what do we do differently? What is the right?
There's something here to address or be cognizant of. And,
So I think, God has all of that. And by the way, okay, when you asked me to talk about this, I have to share one of the lessons. Do you mind?
No, not at all.
One of the lessons to me of this whole thing that has been huge. So Gary Thomas is another one of the, marriage ministry people who's just wonderful.
Yep.
He had written a book last year that for some reason it escaped my notice, called When to Walk Away. And I had one marriage ministry person after another who was calling me, and one of them was like, okay, you have to read this book and you have to get a copy for everybody on your staff, everybody on your team, because of course the whole team is upset too, right? My family was upset. The team was upset. Like everybody's upset. And the message of When to Walk Away, I think, is so crucial for anyone who's facing something like this, whether it's, a business partner or somebody, their in-laws or, getting attacked on social media or whatever it is. What Gary Thomas did was he looked at the fact that Jesus actually walked away from toxic people and toxic situations.
Yeah.
He actually walked away or let them walk away instead of doing what we think is the Christian thing to do, which is just to continue to take it or reach back out over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And he points out when you've got a toxic person or a toxic situation, what Jesus calls us to do is what he did, which is like, basically, I'm sorry, I got a mission. I can't be distracted from it. And if I keep engaging with you, that is absolutely distracting me from the thing that God has called me to do. And so, I love you, but I'm not going to let you continue to take me away from the other stuff. So for me, for example, I realized, and I actually talked to Gary about this. I'm like crying as I'm talking to him on the phone. I'm like, thank you so much for writing this book. And it was interesting because I realized not only do I have a ministry mission that this is distracting me from, because we're spending so much time figuring out how do we respond and what do we say to social media and how do I do this and how do I blah, blah, blah. And it's distracting me because it's taking my time and my team's time, but also distracting me from healing from the cancer and stressing me out right when my body does not need stress. And so it was such a weight off my shoulders to read that book. So this is basically an advertisement for Gary's
Well, there
book.
you go. Well, there you go. Well, I hate to make light of this for a brief second, but like you and I shared some texts as you were going through this. And,
yes.
Every day, our listeners probably know this by now, we do stand up at 10 o'clock, and inevitably we ask for who needs prayer at 10 o'clock. And man, it just felt like Shaunti's name kept coming up every few days. It was like COVID. Oh, no, wait. Cancer. Oh, no, wait. Personal attacks. Like, I was like, poor Shaunti. Like, she's being mentioned every other day at our stand-up for prayer.
Horrible. It was so horrible. There were a few weeks there that were
oh,
bad.
My gosh. Oh, well, thank you for sharing the story. I love kind of the two messages there, which are, we as a society, particularly Christians, have got to think about how we react to things. And I think of scenarios, in my life, whether it was my daughter being bullied in high school, like I reacted with anger. I mean,
I want to hear that story later.
And it wasn't overly productive, right? I mean, I'm hurt. My daughter's not in a great place, and I'm a parent, and it's a private school, and I'm like super frustrated.
What am I paying for?
Exactly. Yes. That was it. Thank you for saying that. You know where that was going. But how we react is really important to our ministry and to our walk and to our
100%.
And to our witness.
Yeah.
And this, we don't necessarily have to throw ourselves in the blender every single day when there's toxicity coming from one direction or the other. We do want to kind of solve it, right? I feel like that's part of the deal.
There's a desire to defend ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, how dare you?
Yeah, the fight or flight thing. That's
whatever.
right.
And that's understandable. And that's why this was such a profound, whoa. You mean Jesus walked away?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we think of people always say, well, what about Jesus with the whips driving the money changers out of the temple? And he was fighting, and that's the muscular Jesus that, a lot of people talk about. And absolutely, that's a piece of the puzzle too. But if I can point out something biblical, by the way,
yes,
if
please.
you don't mind, if you don't mind me pointing out something biblical,
that would be okay. Funny. That is allowed.
But we miss something really important about that, the whips driving out the money changers story. If you look at all the Gospels, and you look at the places that talk about that last week of Jesus's life, and there's some things that are truncated that are in some stories that don't appear in others where you see there's more detail. I can't remember which Gospel it is. Sorry, I wish I could. But if you look at one of them, you'll actually see that Jesus was being pretty strategic about this last week of his life.
That's
like
right.
From Palm Sunday to the resurrection, like he knew that this was going to be all right. Passover's coming up. This is when this is all going to happen. He knew that there was going to be scrutiny. Mm-hmm. This is his last sort of normal week.
Yeah.
And so one of the Gospels shows that he actually got to Jerusalem in the evening, late in the afternoon, I think it says, the day before, and he walked into the temple, saw all the money changers, and it says he looked around carefully, he left, and he came back the next morning because there weren't enough people in the temple to watch this display.
Oh,
to watch him make a point.
Okay.
And so he came back the next morning when there would have been tons of people, lots of people at the tables with the money changers. But when he got there, the late in the afternoon / evening, I forget what the language is, that would have been a time everybody's cleaning up. You've been at exhibits where like the tables are being broken down and there's just nobody around. It wasn't the right time for a statement. And so when he went in with that whip and he turned over the tables, this was not and this is what we often mistake, this was not a statement of passion and impulse and I am so mad, I'm I'm going to troll this person on Twitter. I'm just going to throw out this mean, I can't believe they bullied me, press send. And then a day later you go, oh, dang, right?
Yeah.
This was a calculated message that was being sent. And we miss that.
What a cool observation.
Yeah.
We miss that. And we also miss, of course, it was against the religious people.
Right. That's right.
It was against the people who were being legalistic.
Yeah.
And on behalf of those who are the most in need.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of thinking to do, not just about those other people who are being mean to us on social media. We have a lot of thinking to do ourselves about how we respond.
That's good.
Yeah.
This is a different podcast for a different day, but if you're on social media like I am, I use Twitter for my work stuff. I use Facebook for my personal stuff and maybe Instagram for my family stuff. Like that's probably how I would look at the different platforms. If you spend too much time, probably not on Instagram, but Facebook or Twitter, it feels like these messages are just coming nonstop and you want to react this is not a Christian thing, maybe more of a humanistic thing, but it's like, this is all piling up. Like, where's my expression opportunity?
Yeah.
And I think the worst thing that I have done on social media, you and I've actually talked about that on this podcast, is to do the immediate reaction thing.
Yeah.
Like that's where it's all bad. Like I've never been constructive in my response. I've always regretted it. But I do feel like there's that human, like, when do I get to say what I want to say, as opposed to just seeing this pile on of crazy messaging out there.
Well, and to me, first of all, of course, I think we all feel that way sometimes. Like 100% of us. I think that is the definition behind why it just keeps cycling, right? But it's interesting this is one of the things, again, I'm going to be back to being in a advertisement for Gary Thomas's book.
You go, Gary. Here it is, bud.
But that was one of the reasons why when to walk away.
Yeah.
It changed how I thought about that, actually. And it basically, one of the things, the message there that resonated with me so much was, am I essentially allowing, like literally in a sense of allowing myself to get wrapped up in something that by definition is distracting from the bigger mission that God has called me to.
That's it.
And that's not just in time, it's an emotional energy. Here's what I'll say. Like, okay, I'll think about it overnight and I'll respond in the morning.
Right.
And so all night you're like, doing the Tetris thing. Okay, if I say this, then I have to send that first. And, you're thinking about it as opposed to literally going, why do I have to respond?
You don't. Man.
You don't.
That's
and
it.
why and am I even supposed to be seeing these comments?
Right.
Like maybe I should unfollow. Maybe I should take them off my feed. Maybe I should. Why am I doing this to myself again? And that to me is one of the big things I've been sort of chewing on recently that I think a lot of us need to. It's not as simple as, well, I'll just block them, which is a piece of it. It's more of a big picture of what am I called to do? And so my example of this was, thankfully, I read the book just at the right time. And instead of, I had started down the road of responding and this and that and the other. And so finally I just said, you know what? I'm going to write one statement. I'm going to put it on my homepage and I'm going to say, this is it. This is the one thing I'm going to say about this. Here you go. And I'm not going to respond to anything else. And if people email, which they do constantly, or on social media, which they do constantly, we say, here's the public statement. That's it.
That's another good kind of piece of advice, right?
It allows you to let it go.
Say something, say something,
right.
and
Sorry.
yes, it allows you to let go and move on. And
I forgot to say that was the point behind me saying that. Because it's not like you have to be completely silent all the time, but figuring out how is the thing.
Well, speaking of comments,
What?
As we
the look that you have on your face is scaring me.
as we wind down, I do have one final thing to get your wisdom on. So I was asked, Dan and I had Badia on this podcast. So the deputy opinion director of Newsweek was on our podcast.
Wow.
She was with the Forward at the time, but now she's at Newsweek. Dear friend of ours, like Dan and I are huge fans. Amazing person. And she asked me when she got to Newsweek pretty early on, would I write an op-ed about the things that are misunderstood about evangelicals?
Ooh, I like
and
that.
where this came out of was Batia left her podcast with us saying, why aren't evangelicals, there's 80 million of you in the U.S., why aren't you the leading voice for the poor, for the marginalized, for the injustice? Like she was, I mean, it was pretty intense. And you know what? I took the call to action. I'm like, beautiful. We are going to be a voice to evangelicals. Sorry, we don't want to sound preachy or like we get it all right or all that, but we took her challenge. Anyway, she asked me to write this op-ed. What are the 3 things that people misunderstand most about evangelicals? And one of the misunderstandings was that evangelicals are anti-science. A lot of this has come up in the world of COVID and who's going to get vaccinated and what are the right protocols and all this nonsense,
of course,
right?
yes.
But I referred to Dr. Francis Collins, who ran the Genome Project, and he's the head of the NIH. I referred to all the theologians historically that have, the botanists and the monks and everybody who've been a huge part of science. It is one of the things, sorry to be a little bit repetitive, that we appreciate about you. Is the focus on the science. And I believe that God is the inventor of science. I think I wrote that in the op-ed. And you have shown many, many examples in your books, in your life, in your research of the congruence of science and biblical truth and faith. So before we let you go, and we're gonna close with a couple things, but can you maybe give some Good Samaritan advice to our listeners about how to embrace science and let it enhance your faith as opposed to maybe thinking it's different than that?
Yes, I'm so glad.
Do you get the question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I 100% get it. And I'm so glad you mentioned it because there is in sort of its pure form. Now, and this doesn't always work this way, but in its pure form, science is the pursuit of truth, right? And all truth
There you go.
is God's truth, right? It doesn't mean that there's not truth in God's truth in other places, scattered around, because sometimes, it's not like other groups that I might disagree with have no truth, right? But all truth is God's, comes from God. And so to the degree that science is the pursuit of that truth, we can't be afraid of it, right? We have to be partnering with it. We have to be in pursuit of that as well. And one of the things that I will say, and I don't think I've ever said this publicly before, but I'll say this for the first time here, is that early on, I will admit, when I was first doing the studies for the first 2 books that we did research studies for, were the books about men and the book about women, right?
Yep.
For women only and for men only. And then, kept going from there. And I will admit that at the beginning, because I wasn't experienced as a social researcher yet, and because this was the first time I had done something like this, I didn't know that I'd be where I am today, right? Like I didn't know this was going to be a decades thing. There was a temptation to try to go, well, but what happens if it comes out wrong? Maybe I can just ignore it. Maybe I'll just pretend that it didn't say what it said and I'll put the chapter in anyway, right? Like, seriously, like there's a temptation to sort of fudge it a little bit. And the reality that I saw so clearly, I was basically afraid that God's truth wasn't going to come forward in the science. And that's just a lack of trust in God.
That's good.
Right? And to be able to say that everything now that I've seen this, we're about to, we're right in the middle actually of our 11th major national research study. And what we've seen with the other 10 is that the science, the surveys, the neuroscience, what you see, done in the COVID stuff, I mean, it backs up what the Bible has said all along.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's part of, I think, the ultimate problem is that we don't 100% believe and don't 100% trust our God.
That's good.
When it comes to those things. And so we have to take stuff into our own hands, which, I think I've heard a couple times that has happened throughout history, that we try to control things and take matters into our own hands, and it never ends
not
well.
Not so good. Yeah,
so
not so good. That's great.
To me, that's the encouragement for people, is that if you are really trying to pursue truth, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. You could be talking about, helping your kids get good grades on their tests. But the process that you're using it, if you're pursuing truth, that is science.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of it. Just call it what it is.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, what's next for Shaunti?
Well, we are in the middle of this next big research project.
Already, okay.
Yes.
You never stop.
No.
You are always going. That's awesome.
These projects take 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So they go on for a while. But this one, I think we're nuts to tackle these 2 topics back to back. But, we tackled the money topic in marriage, the other one big controversial topic. So guess what the next big topic is that we're tackling?
Is it marriage related?
It is
It's
marriage
gotta be
related.
sex?
Yes.
Okay.
We started working on this about a year ago. So we're about a year and 2 or 3 months into about a 2-year research and writing process.
Wow.
So it's been amazing. It's a very awkward topic to research because I can't do my normal thing of going up to people in coffee shops and asking them questions.
Right. That's right.
I would get arrested, But it is definitely, both sex and money really are such issues in marriage, and we're super excited to be able to tackle both of these. So
for you. Well, wish you well on that.
Well,
that's
thanks.
fantastic.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. How can our listeners find you?
Go to Shaunti.com.
Shaunti.com.
Yeah.
Super easy.
Go.
Yep. And if I can just make a plug, we're about to finally launch those first online video courses to be able to do beyond just a book.
Nice.
To be able to do the
And are those at
video
Shaunti.com? Is that where they can find them?
it's actually going to be surprisinghope.com.
Okay.
Surprisinghope.com.
Excellent.
But they can find them
Cool.
at the main site.
Well, Shaunti, as always, this has been a delight.
Yep.
And
Thank you, guys.
We're super thankful that you've moved through a cancer diagnosis and a COVID scare and all the things, but you're just one of those people that you're legitimate. You are true to your faith, to your walk, to your research. And it's just such a delight to be associated with you. And we're excited about the next publication, Let's Find Joy, that's going to come out this fall. And we wish the best to you and Jeff and
Thanks.
And Morgan and Luke. And thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Absolutely.
This has been a blast.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
Well, hey, everybody. This is David Hendrickson with my co-host,
Dan Riveros,
from the Walking Through Samaria podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in with us with our dear friend, Shaunti Feldhahn. We'll talk to you next time.
See you guys. For more content like this, visit us at givingcompany.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Walking Through Samaria.